Hello everyone, and welcome to this session on our Customer Zero transformation story with Azure Local. I'm Adam Dolman, Vice President of Technology for the Microsoft Alliance here at Atos. In this session, I'll narrate how we tackled our own pressing infrastructure challenges and turned it into an innovation success with Azure Local. How we moved from a traditional VMware setup to Azure Local, implementing a new hybrid cloud modern solution, before using these lessons to take it forward to our clients. We're now running this environment live, and by the end you'll see how we've achieved an efficient modern infrastructure setup while keeping our workload on-prem meeting business needs. So our problem when we entered 2025, like many businesses, we had a significant VMware estate that was critical to our internal IT, facing some license renewal challenges. Specifically, we targeted 4 VMware clusters for this initial pilot that ran dozens of applications across 2 of our data centers and needed to remain on-prem for numerous operational reasons. This environment was running well, but with the upcoming licensing changes and cost increases, we thought it was an opportunity to look to see how we could modernize our IT for the future and how we could reduce our 5-year TCO. So staying on top of costs, of course, one priority, but also how we modernize this environment to bring new agility and capabilities to our internal IT functions. Our developers want to know, can we get a cloud-like experience on-prem, use what we've got used to in Azure for other environments, and modernize and bring our IT forward for the future. So in summary, we took this challenge as an opportunity to see how we could modernize and update our infrastructure. So our solution very early on, Azure Local, was at the top of the list of candidates for this and became an obvious choice. In essence, for those of you unfamiliar with Azure Local, it's effectively the evolution of Azure Stack HCI, which brings hyper-converged infrastructure and Azure management together to give you an Azure cloud-like experience on-prem with a single control plane. For us, Azure Local promised everything our VMware environment could do, running our Windows, Linux VMs and our Kubernetes environments, while bringing the new capabilities of Azure via Azure Arc and a single control plane in public Azure. So we had considered a few optional paths as well, like staying with VMware, but as mentioned, the upcoming licensing costs made this almost in the end a no-brainer when we evaluated all of the options for us. Azure Local ticked all of the boxes on feature parity for what we needed to do on the environment. It could support all of our network needs, our virtual machine hosting requirements, and enhanced Kubernetes capabilities, as well as mentioned this single control plane across Azure. So unifying our environments already running in public Azure, along with what we have on-prem at this point. Azure Local subscription licensing options as well also offered some interesting capabilities, being able to make use of our MAC agreement towards our on-prem costs. And it's future-proofing. So it's beyond just these virtual machines. As mentioned, Azure Arc Data Services, for example, can allow us to run Azure SQL Managed Service in the future, potentially modernizing our SQL environments and bringing brand new capabilities that we haven't previously been able to look at on-prem. And then last but not least, the title of this session is Customer Zero. It helps us learn the lessons to take forwards to our clients, so we can go to our clients of Azure Local, and it's not just a case of saying about it. We've been there, we've done it. Any solution has to make financial sense and deliver and evaluate benefits that work for not just the technology, but also for the business. And on this, Azure Local, in partnership with our hardware provider, gives very significant financial arguments for the move. In total, we're looking at about a 30% TCO reduction over 5 years moving to Azure Local. This is a combination of both right-sizing, making use of modern hardware and being able to downsize our footprint in the data center, reducing our power consumption, being more sustainable, but also Azure Local's licensing models. Licensing Azure Local can be done in a couple of ways, via the subscription model, paying per core, where that comes through your public Azure subscription, or via Azure Hybrid Benefit, where you can make use of your existing Azure Hybrid Benefit via your SA on-prem. Both these options represented cost-effective solutions for us and helped justify the business case. Avoiding this VMware license renewal that was coming up gave us an immediate cost avoidance. And with the new hardware refresh, so it's about 30% was projected at the start for savings on Azure Local. And so we went with our business case and we got the approval and moved into the planning and design phase. So in this project, speed was of the essence for us. We wanted to start realizing benefits quickly and avoid paying for any extended VMware licensing or support. So we formed a project team very quickly that included Microsoft and Dell in supporting us in this solution. This cross-functional effort of our own teams, combined with Microsoft's engineering and Dell's engineering expertise, allowed us to go from an idea to hardware in sight in record time. Some of the key steps in our planning, first of all, the architectural design. How are we going to design our Azure Local solution to be able to easily migrate our workloads across? The goal was simple at day one, a lift and shift of our VMware environments onto Azure Local, without the added complexity of any modernization. That would be a later phase 2. And then hardware procurement. So we've worked with our hardware partners to get an integrated solution into our data centers that will be fit for our needs. And the actual overall design of Azure Local and the implementation into our Azure networking itself. So while we were waiting for the delivery, we were able to move in parallel, setting the network up to be ready, setting our Azure subscriptions up to be ready to receive the hardware. So this put us in a really great place that as soon as the hardware had landed, we were ready to move very quickly to get this set up, get Azure Local running, and be ready to start a migration. So on the migration, we decided to go with Azure Migrate, currently in public preview at the time we were looking at this, to migrate our VMs across from VMware. Again, as a precursor, we started our migration assessment beforehand and had Azure Local running on our VMware clusters to be able to do the assessment and picture what problems we might have in this. Then as soon as the Azure Local hardware arrived on site, we were able to connect it up and actually start our migration project in a very rapid timescale. And this collaborative approach of getting all of our teams together at once, along with our partners, gives a very smooth process to get there and have ready to go migration as soon as we hit the ground. So let's talk a little bit about the architecture of the solution we decided to implement. As mentioned, this is replacing an existing VMware solution, and we wanted to move quickly here. So a lift and shift was the design positioning for future modernization. So this allowed us to deploy 2 Azure Local clusters, 1 per data center, and stretch the networking of the existing VMware clusters across into Azure Local. So not going for an SDN approach here, but rather stretching the existing VLANs across. This would let us migrate VMs as and when was convenient for business needs and still maintain easy communication between them and not have to tackle any issues of re-IP addressing, for example. From a compute and storage perspective, we went for much newer hardware with a much higher CPU and memory density, allowing us to reduce our server footprint by about 50%, while keeping our power consumption roughly similar to what we had before, so increasing our sustainability for this hosting. We also decided to go with an all-NVMe setup with Storage Spaces Direct, giving us extremely high IOPS performance for future needs in hosting on this cluster, along with a deep reasonable capacity overhead for future expansion on the cluster. This, we believe, will set us up well for the future and allow us to modernize, take advantage of Azure Arc services, such as Azure Kubernetes service, such as the Azure Data Services formerly mentioned, while minimizing the initial day one migration. So with our new environment built and on-prem, the challenge was then how do we migrate several hundred virtual machines and workloads across, as well as a number of Kubernetes applications running. So our strategy, as mentioned, was using Azure Migrate. And before the hardware was even set up, we had the results of our Azure Migrate assessment, and we were able to look at any particular challenges we might face before we even started. And then once the cluster was up, when connecting it back to Azure Migrate then does the migration for us. We were able to divide this into batches of VMs across multiple change windows to move applications across while keeping minimal downtime. Azure Migrate works in the background, doing delta copies of the VMs across and continually keeping them in sync to the point you're ready to migrate. It's a simple action to then cut the VM on one side and bring it up on the other, minimizing downtime and also giving a very easy reversion path if for whatever reason that becomes necessary. We didn't really have any challenges in this. We weren't running any particularly old VMs or standard set of operating systems, so for us it was a fairly smooth move. What we did approach slightly differently was our Kubernetes clusters. We did have Tanzu running before. We were moving across to Azure Kubernetes service. So we took the decision to redeploy these applications and just migrate whatever stateful data was necessary for this. We did this by redeploying whether it be Helm charts or new manifests and migrating back and backup and restore of any stateful data we needed to move across. And so this then led us to our new Azure Local environment running and a switch of operational models for our teams who were previously operating this on VMware. So we now have a new operational paradigm, effectively. We have a genuine hybrid cloud environment connected up to our public Azure estate, with this single control plane, as I mentioned, and allowing us to unify a lot of our tooling that we were previously using different tooling on-prem or in the cloud. So for instance, Azure Update Manager can now have an entire view of the state. We can use Azure Policy to manage VMs across public cloud and hybrid cloud simultaneously. So this is a slight shift for our admins who are used to working across two separate environments. They now get to use the skills they know on Azure across both environments. We can use things like Azure Resource Graph, for example, to have a complete picture and inventory of everything we've got running, rather than, again, having two multiple environments. Of course, some of this you can achieve with just Azure Arc as well, but here we've also brought the whole new benefits of the connected control plane for being able to deploy across both environments in a very similar way. So this gave us a streamlined operational model where we're operating this cluster in the same way we manage any cluster for our customers. We're using the same cloud operations teams to manage this exactly as we do for our customer instances of Azure now. This gave us better SLAs. It allowed us to manage the things in a more logical way. And obviously a few lessons learned along the way. It allowed us to train our operational teams up on Azure Local. And it wasn't too steep a learning curve. They were used to working in Azure. They were used to working in VMware. So it wasn't a steep learning curve to adapt this to Azure Local. Then the other advantage, as mentioned, in doing this was to achieve a saving in TCO. So since we've done this, we've been keeping an eye on costs and cost management. And right now, at this point in time, we're very closely tracking to this 30% reduction in TCO as we anticipated. Azure Hybrid Benefit lets us license our Windows VMs as we need them. And then we've got these new capabilities, as I mentioned. So at this point in time, we're now looking at how we make use of Azure Arc SQL and Postgres, for example, in this new hybrid world to streamline our operations, reduce the number of VMs, and move to more SaaS-like services. So essentially, we brought the benefits of Azure into our own data center in this project. And so completing the migration, I think we've yielded the benefits we're really looking for. We're on track for this 30% TCO. We've got our modernized infrastructure, and we've saved the licensing on our VMware clusters, and achieved the benefits of having a more sustainable environment over the next few years with our cloud-consistent operations now running, as I say, as we would for any customer environment. There were a few lessons we learned on the way, and we're now in a position to take these lessons forwards as we would look to do this for a customer estate. And any questions you have about this, how we've achieved this journey and how we can help you with the same thing, just feel free to reach out and see how Atos can help take you forwards to have a modern hybrid infrastructure ready for the AI era. Thank you very much. As I said, I was Dolman, and hope you've enjoyed this presentation.